to be here. Guys, I just realized this is our 10th Osher Memorial Lecture. It started in 2015. Look at that, right? I know. Come on. As many of you know, it's designed to celebrate Lynn and Vincent's enduring legacy and work. We do that in a variety of ways. If you haven't already seen it, we did that in a children's book recently that Emily Castle and I worked on with various others. That was a lot of fun. Showcased a lot of the things that Lynn overcame throughout the course of her journey to win, of course, the Nobel Prize in Economics, including overcoming a stutter and not being admitted to the econ program at UCLA. So she showed them in a big way, that's for sure. I never met Vincent. I'm told he had a reputation for asking long, convoluted questions that no presenter could reasonably be expected to answer on the spot. What is the state? Among others. We endeavor to carry on lots of these traditions at the workshop. Maybe not that particular one, though we certainly still have lively discussions, that's for sure. This lecture honors them both as people, as interdisciplinary scholars, in a lot of ways ahead of their time. They're focused on trust in institutions, polarization, you name it, I think really resonate with this moment we're living through today. And frankly, I can think of no better speaker who we're going to be hearing from in just a moment to really highlight that. But first, it's my honor and privilege to turn things over to Professor Jessica Steinberg, Chair of International Studies at the Hamilton Lugar School. And we're very fortunate to have as our Director of the Environmental Natural Resource Governance Program.
Everyone, welcome. I'm so delighted to see all of you here. It's really my privilege to introduce Dr. Jenna Bednar, who is a professor of political science and public policy at the University of Michigan's Ford School of Public Policy and a member of the external faculty at the Santa Fe Institute, which, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a research institute really dedicated to the study of complex adaptive systems. And actually, Lynn Ostrom was on the science board there up until she died, I believe, actually, until her end. So,
now. What? I'm on it. Yeah. Okay, I hope I said that.
Jenna is now on the science board. Professor Bednar's research focuses on how collective action builds social goods and the role that institutions play in making that collaboration possible. Her interests include robust system design, especially of federal democracies, which we'll hear about today, the interdependence of norms, culture, and institutions, which has been especially inspirational for my own work, and place-based public policy to support human social flourishing. Her work on federal institutions has been foundational in the study of institutional design. And in 2019, her book, The Robust Federation, Principles of Design, was awarded the American Political Science Association's Martha Durthik Best Book Award in recognition for its enduring contribution to the study of Federalist institutions. In 2020, she was named the APSA Daniel Elazar Distinguished Federalism Scholar. And in 2021, she was the Andrew Mellon Foundation Fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford. I should also say the impact of her work extends far beyond the classroom and scholarly journals. Her recent Daedalus article, Governance for Human Social Flourishing, is a foundation for an interactive exhibit at the University of Michigan Museum of Art, which is designed to encourage spontaneous conversation between strangers about the concepts of dignity, sustainability, community, and beauty. She's also the inaugural faculty director of University of Michigan's Votes and Democratic Engagement, leading the Ann Arbor campus's voting infrastructure while also co-chairing the Year of Democracy and Civic Engagement, a campus-wide collaborative effort to elevate democracy-related research, curriculum, and engagement. I should also say, on a more personal note, Jenna is a really longtime friend and mentor, as well as a friend of the workshop. And I'm really honored to have had the opportunity to work with and learn from her. And I'm so very delighted to welcome her as this year's Ostrom Memorial Lecturer, speaking on the double security of democracy, federalism's effect on democratic robustness. I cannot imagine a more timely and consequential topic. So please join me in welcoming Professor Jenna Bednar.
All right, so I have to start by saying what an honor it is to be here in this room, as you know. And although I first met Lynn in Santa Fe at a conference on robustness, you know, I didn't get to know her like many of you did, but even then, she was like, "Love what you're doing. Keep doing it," right? And like that was her, right? Just like saw what was interesting and really encouraged you to keep digging. And so I think it occurred to me as I was walking over here, I should have, this whole thing is essentially, well, it's both an ode to Lynn and Vincent, because I used to say I was kind of like their love child. I work on federalism from a Lynn perspective. But this really is an ode to their collaborative work. Collaboration has really shaped the way I've come to think about this, which is an evolution from where I started with federalism, and you'll see it a bit. And this sense that, trust the people because the people can sort it out. And so I hope you'll see a bit of that in here as well. These are tough times. So I thought, let's just dig into it a little bit and think about where we are as a democracy and whether or not federalism could do something useful. And it's very much a question. I will say I'm not going to come to a firm answer, but I'm going to give you some different reasons for why maybe in this talk, different from what Madison said. Okay. So where we're going today, how might federalism support democracy? We're going to talk a little bit about democracy in peril, just a tiny bit. I'm going to run through some of the reasons for and against federalism getting involved, and then I'm really going to turn it into a complex systems view. By the way, is this totally in your way?
No, you're okay.
You sure? Yeah. And the other thing, interrupt me. Okay, don't sit quietly all the way through to the end and then ask me the zinger. Ask this.
The state.
Indiana.
Yeah, there you go.
I come from Michigan. That's my answer to him. Okay.
I hear you.
Then we're going to get into a complexity science view that I think is a different view from the one that Madison gave us. And then for those who have to leave early and you've already apologized, which I really appreciate you making the time to be here, where I'm going to take everybody is just thinking about federalism as a space for rights exploration, which is really not where we ordinarily think about federalism at all. And also a rule of law repository, also not at all the way we think about federalism. Okay. So first, how is American democracy doing? So Liz Cheney, democracy's in peril, 7 in 10 Americans, countries in crisis. This is actually about a year ago. Trump's indictment plus candidacy could endanger democracy, the rule of law. Biden warns U.S. democracy in peril from the extremist Trump. That's but former Pence legal aid, Trump's hold on GOP puts democracy in grave peril. Not good and not unusual, and has only gotten a lot wilder. So what did we want to do about it? What do we want to do about it? There's an awful lot of, oh my God, we've got to fix the institutions, right? We got to fix the court. We got to fix the way the electoral college. We've got to fix the way we vote, fix the amendment system. There's an awful lot of something. Somebody's got to do something. Somebody's got to step up. And this was before the election. I haven't actually been hearing quite as much of this since, but fix federalism. That the states are really a source of all things evil in the American political system. So how crazy is it that I would stand here in front of you and say, well, maybe we should think about what federalism might do for democracy? And let's just hope that comes back up. Oh, I know, I see where it is. Okay. It's coming.
It will. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's just start with Madison and Madison's claim. In a single republic, all these bad things can happen, right? Like you're concentrating power in the hands of one. In the compound Republic of America, the power that is surrendered by the people wonder if he'd like to reframe that, by the way, is first divided between two distinct governments and then the portion allotted to each government among distinct and separate departments. So that's this, separation of powers and checks and balances, but at two levels. So double security arises to the rights of the people. Ultimately, this is all an argument about liberty. This is all an argument about how we keep our freedom. And that for Madison, federalism was essential to that, even though he thought the state legislatures were a bunch of idiots. He loved the system. But we've, as political scientists, we've been busy recording the facts of American history. And so my colleague at Michigan, Rob Mickey, wonderful book documenting subnational authoritarianism in the United States, where these states acted essentially like autocracies. And then how did they get out of it, right? So the book is really how they move forward, but beginning from the premise that the federal system enables autocracy to exist. Jamila Michener, really powerful documentation of the inequity that arises because of the federal system. That because federalism exists, states pursue different policies, and those different policies have different outcomes, and that leads to inequity in particular with an overlay of race. And continuing on that theme, Jake Grumbach, probably many of you have seen this terrific book, very carefully collecting the, data on democracy measures in all the different states and making this strong argument that the states have existed, have gotten away with limiting rights. Okay. So that's not good. And yet here, there's still more to the talk. How could there possibly be anything left? Yeah, I know you're all like, yeah, isn't there wine? Friends, on the other hand, so actually Dan Kellerman, who I went to grad school with, I'm just like, Jenna, I'm doing some work. And we think maybe it's not all bad. Not all bad. Not all good either. No. But not all bad. It's conditional, right? So there's certain conditions where states control key government functions. And so like basically the whole system depends on the states to get anything done. And some opposition parties control some of the states, sufficient numbers of the states. If that's the case, then federalism, they still are couching it may help to prevent an aspiring national autocrat from supplanting democracy. So this is as cheerful as it gets. And yet I still stand here. Okay. And really, this is why. This is why. Our states depend so much on the federal government. So on average, 31% of state budgets is a transfer from the federal government. But the darker the color, the more dependent they are. And we, yes.
Yeah. Those percentages, how much of that is based on subscribing to the healthcare system?
A lot.
Oklahoma opted out of that for a long time. So their numbers are lower relative to other states, but definitely not as low as like.
Oh, are you talking about ACA?
ACA, yes.
Oh, the expansion. But
yes.
still, I mean, the expansion is only a part of, Medicaid is still existing.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Yeah, no, a lot of this is Medicaid.
Okay.
A lot. But I mean, this is a significant number.
That's huge.
Sure is.
Right. And so if you have a president, let's just say hypothetically, who says, I've got control of the money. So, You will do what I say, Columbia University. Okay? You will do what I say, Governor of Maine, although I don't know where that stands actually. But anyway, we can see this is a big problem for the states. So to me, I look at this and I think about the way that we have thought about federalism's ability to play a role in supporting democracy has been built entirely around a frame, that Madisonian frame of competition, of being a sufficient rival that you can check authority. Okay, but we're not going to win that arm wrestle with this dependence. And I'm not even yet talking about the personal dependence, this, kind of charismatic authority that the president has right now that demands a level of loyalty that is also making it very hard for the states to be effective checks. Okay? So let's think, instead of this conditionality and this competition, what could a complexity frame bring us? So I'm going to introduce a couple of ideas. I actually got it, after I made this slide, I got it down to 3. Not just stability or optimality, but I'm going to talk about robustness, because that's what I do. And then I want to talk about norms. It's not just about institutions, but it's about norms. And I hope you're feeling the Lynn power when we talk about norms. And then not just about, well, this is the one that just kind of became an overall frame, collaboration. And very much, this is something I'm super interested in right now, that defining rights, defining our values is a process. It doesn't just happen like that. And so let's think about how that process takes place and the role that federalism might play in it. That's where we're headed. Pausing for questions.
Is it a bi-directional process, meaning not just emergence, but
Oh yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you will see when we get to that section, I'm going to give a lot of progressive biased rights recognition, mainly because progressives have been so doubtful about federalism for so long. But we could do the same thing with conservative favored rights and policies. So for sure, it goes, it moves. I'm just interested in the process, not where we land. Okay, robustness. So thinking about where democracy sits globally in the United States, and with lots of different indices or measures of democracy, but all showing a decline globally, and then especially in the United States. And we think about these measures, which reduce, they're all composites, in some cases of several hundred variables, composites that bring it down to a single number. And then we look at that single number and we're, horrified to see the decline. But as a complex systems theorist, I think what's going on under the hood and in the interaction between all those variables, because these democratic systems are very high dimensional, which all of those indices recognize by pulling data and measuring things lots of different ways. But they're also complex, meaning that those measures or those separately measured variables interact with one another. And so there's going to be some nonlinearities within those measures. And so, well, first, just this health, that the health of democracy is not just this question of optimality, but really I worry, I think many of you worry, not about it being the best. How was my bodybuilding? Did you know she was a bodybuilder?
Not today.
The best, but we worry about it failing, right? So we worry not about just it being forever and ever sky high, the greatest, but what's going to cause it to fail. And when we collapse those measures into a single digit, are we over collapsing and failing to recognize what might cause it to fail because of some of these interdependencies that are going on between those measures? I just lay that out there for those of you who are much more empirically forward than I embrace it, but it's not my first, I'm a theorist. But anyway, so I think in terms of robustness or relatedly resilience, which is this kind of sense of an ordered disorder that is, there's a lot going on in that system. And we don't want to pretend that there isn't a lot going on in the system. And what we want to do is maintain this system's ability to adapt because the world is changing. Our needs and what we want as citizens change. We invent new stuff, new technology that creates opportunities and a lot of problems. And there are changing things from global trade to climate change that we have to adapt to. So we want to maintain this adaptive capacity and resist this concentration of power.
How do you believe that technology has contributed to kind of like defederalization, with people being able to instantly communicate across an entire continent? You'd think that they'd be more federally minded. Is that something that you believe is happening?
So interesting. This is going to be dinner conversation.
I think so.
That's a really, really good question. I mean, I will say this just right now, I worry a lot, and we're going to get into it a little bit, but about the decline. I'm not going to say death yet because I'm a hopeful person, of local journalism. And I think that the technology right now contributed to that decline, but I don't think it needs to. I think it could also contribute to its recovery. Yeah, Barbara.
Yeah, this might be helpful just to note a point that our country has gone through a lot of issues with technology, particularly communications. So if you get the big network infrastructures, railroads, telephone, telegraph, we had to, through federalism, experiment with that in the 19th, early 20th centuries, where the regulation started at the state level and then led to, because these infrastructures have to be built nationwide, into interstate commerce. And the beginnings of expert agencies to regulate an industry started with these common carriage industries. And so then when you get to radio and everything else, like you're saying at the point now, the technology is a factor that goes into these complex systems that affects the operation of the government. And it might not just cut one way or the other. It could be kind of hybrid, kind of multiple reactions. So I just thought, I didn't know if that would help. But that's, with these earlier infrastructures, that's how we experimented.
It would become a great book. Anyway.
I already published some on that. But I mean, there's a whole people who study that.
All right, so what is robustness? When we talk about robustness, we're talking about this functional continuity that is, rather than a complete failure of the system. It implies this ability to recover from what we call perturbations, but anything that pushes at the system. And that may mean structural adaptation, so that the system may not look identical as long as it continues to function. And for us, that means it continues to be a democracy. We may need to change or decide to change. Parts of it may evolve. It's not always, this is why I like robustness. It's a combination of kind of engineering and an evolvable system. And adaptation. So in order to adapt, that means we've got to explore the space. What are the possibilities? So this is not in true form. This is kind of the idea of a bottom up rather than top down solution. We don't assume that you know the right answer, but instead we're going to explore to get there, to figure it out. So it embraces learning. And that's the way, and then we need a method of change. You need some system of mutation and selection. And then because these systems are complex, meaning they're interconnected, interdependent, they're prone to these nonlinear effects, as I said, with my concern about those measurements. And, we're like, well, if we just then tweak this one thing, we're definitely going to go up without recognizing that some interdependencies could actually cause it to go down or stay flat. And then, of course, some of these system changes can happen quite rapidly. So tipping and collapse are possibilities. So robust system design, when we're thinking in terms of robustness, as we're designing a system, we want to make sure that search is a possibility. So, thinking, how would I design this system to make sure people or the components are able to explore the space? You want to manage that interconnectedness because you don't want one failure to cascade and cause the whole to fall. And when improvements are discovered, you want some ability for the system to take advantage of it. So for fans of Jim March, this is the exploitation of what's learned after the exploration. And so some of the qualities in robust systems that we talk about are redundancy. So this is being able to, if you have failure of one component, there's something else that can back it up. Modularity, that's that separation. So there's not too much interconnectedness. And diversity leading to a fullness in this information space. So lots of exploration. And so, to manage the failure by managing that interconnectedness. The components of the system should fail for different reasons. This is really abstract. I think it'll make more sense when I turn to the stuff that I did on federalism in particular, but it's really about democratic systems. So if we design a system for redundancy, modularity, and diversity, that means the system of safeguards that's really familiar to all of us as students of the American political system. So you get redundancy from overlapping institutions that have kind of shared ability to perform certain functions, and then also checking one another. Diversity because we have different aggregations of the public. And modularity from the state and local authority.
Excuse me. Francis Fukuyama writes in his book On Political Order and Political Decay about this sort of idea of institutional rigidity in the United States of America and how it relates to like that sort of overlapping responsibility. He almost describes it as a over democratization of certain institutions. I'm wondering, how do you believe that relates to federalism in the United States?
Yeah, so this is this sense that too many veto players spoils the pot, right? Basically, right?
Vetocracy.
Right. You can't do anything at all. Right. Fair. Right. And this is why some people really prefer parliamentary or majoritarian systems, because it's like, look, we made up our minds, we're going to do it. That's fair. That's a fair argument. I don't know. I guess I'm too much of a worrywart about what could happen if all of that power is held by somebody who doesn't give a whit about my freedom, right? And so I err on the side of preferring these fragmented systems, but fair, because that's certainly more decisive.
Isn't that the same question that Woodrow Wilson actually addressed by creating the executive order in some senses to take that kind of power? Sorry, I'm not an American political theorist at all, really.
Right.
But that's my memory of that.
So executive orders are super fascinating,
And
right? Because
yeah.
right, it's not absent checks. Is right with you. So, I mean, but you cannot, for example, order an agency to do anything that is unconstitutional. But that is the thing, right? It's all gonna come down to norms, which is where we're headed.
Yeah.
All right. But you have to hear this. So if the anti-tyranny system isn't robust, the democracy will fail. So bear in mind, robust is not fail-safe, right? Just because you think you've hit those boxes of redundancy, modularity, diversity, you're not done, right? Because actually, the more interconnected the system, the more fragile it is. And so if you have, for example, an overly aligned party system, right? Or a system of personal loyalty, hypothetically, or this lack of, and if you have this, then the lack of competition, so this is still Madisonian, makes these veto institutions irrelevant, but Francis Fukuyama really happy. Okay. But then also, in a way that Madison didn't really emphasize, or where I think where we can Ostrom it up, lack of adaptive mechanisms, including diverse input and exploration, if you have these things. So I wrote a little bit about this in at PNAS a couple of years ago. So diversity protects against these failures. And so we want to make sure diversity remains in our system. How's that for a little plug for DEI? This is not ordinarily what, anyway, so federalism is a double security against these flaws. And so it keeps both the interest and information diversity in the system. Maybe, all right, it's again, not fail safe, but by fragmenting it that way, that's part of the effect. Norms. What about norms? So what makes a democratic system resilient? We've only talked about thank you, see you later, institutional design, right? But it's got two elements. It's also got these democratic norms and a culture. And this idea has been around for a long time, but was really popularized by Steve Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt a couple of years ago, where they were the ones who identified two really important norms. And I think we might as well just talk about these. There's lots of other ones, but mutual toleration. Okay. That the says that the opposition is legitimate. And forbearance. Okay. There's, our Constitution is so beautifully short. Massive fan of our Constitution. And that means that it comes to life by all of the interpretation we bring to it. But that also means the ambiguity opens up opportunities for opportunism, right? For taking advantage of it. And so forbearance is a norm that's super important, saying I am going to exercise self-constraint. I will hold back and not take advantage of the ambiguity. So norms. How are norms different from laws? Laws, when written, we're able to turn to a court and say, adjudicate this, please. Norms don't typically have the backing of law. They may also be written, but when they're unwritten. So it's on us. It's on us. It's got three components, right? First, a common expectation of what we expect. That's a very big one. Because what is common knowledge?
I have a great example. It's Tulsa before the McGirt ruling.
That may require a little bit of development. People in the room.
Okay, so the McGirt ruling in 2020 basically was a finding in favor of McGirt, who was a member of the Muskogee Creek tribe, and he was appealing to the Supreme Court basically to avoid his conviction for child abuse and molestation and all sorts of horrible things. And so he argued as a tribal citizen, he was not under the jurisdiction of the Oklahoma state government and was instead under the jurisdiction of his tribe. And so he wanted to have his case retried under tribal laws. And so what that did then, and so Gorsuch found that there was a treaty in place dating back to the 1860s that had never been ratified, or that had never been overturned by Congress. Oklahoma, in the meantime, behaves as if it has. And so this whole culture, this whole legal system was, I mean, we lived as if that treaty did not exist. And now McGirt has so upended the cultural and legal situation in Oklahoma. It's still causing problems. There's always news stories, local news stories about how norms and the legal structure changed all the norms. So in a sense, that was a system that we thought we had certain legal structures that didn't.
Yeah.
And so really those legal structures actually were norms.
See, isn't that fascinating? We all thought.
Mhm.
Right, so, but anyway, so nice. Common understanding of expected behavior. We expect you to exercise self-restraint, not take advantage of this office for your own personal gain. Don't turn the White House lawn into a car dealership, for example, right?
That's tomorrow.
Okay, so if that weren't hard enough, second, you have to believe that it's your responsibility to do something about it.
Still possible.
So this is the sense of agency. Okay, citizenship brings rights, but also responsibilities. And if our system depends on norms, that means that it depends on us as agents to stand up when there's a violation of expected behavior. Third, it's not only on you, it's on all of us. So there's this sense of mutual responsibility, mutual backing. These are three very, very tall asks of any population, especially a population that has been coddled for a long while. But just keep those three in mind. Okay, so what makes it fragile?
Can I ask a quick question about
Yeah.
where you move forward?
Yeah.
Why do you see how do people learn this?
No.
Right? I mean, this is a bit of an homage to the fact that we're sitting here in the Tocqueville room, and part of his concern was like, how do you get people who can be democratic citizens? Where does this come from? And when it starts to fracture, what shores it up? Or what is the state? Choose either.
Well, I can't tell you enough how much I love the question, because literally everything I'm doing on the administrative side is trying to answer that question. Like, I really believe that our educational system, including higher ed,
Ask about that.
plays a role in our classrooms. We can do things about what we want to do is keep norms are always going to be present, whether they are commonly held as Americans, or do I have, maybe I have some people from other countries who vote elsewhere in the room, wherever you vote, right? Commonly held. But if those start to decay, there are other ones that develop within our bubbles, right? So I am really concerned about the civic ed, as a piece of that is, what do we, and speaking as an American, what do we as Americans expect? I don't care about your political party. I don't care about your policy preferences. Policy preferences are going to shift, right? What I care is, what do we expect of our leaders? They should be able to pursue their policy agendas. Absolutely 100%, right? But if they mess with the process, that's when it turns out we're needed. So that, and then helping, we can, taking a couple minutes on this because I think it's really important. And all of us who are associated with higher education, we can also help our community members, our students, and also ourselves recognize, I mean, how many of you have had your students or your family members say, what can I do? Who's going to solve this? right? Yeah.
What I hear more than anything is exhaustion and disengagement. So it's not so much what can I do, is, I don't even want to hear this anymore. I'm done. And so how do you grapple with that tension against norms saying, well, this is what we expect, we should be responsible, but we're hearing just the opposite. People are not wanting to be engaged at all anymore.
It is such a human reaction that I think all of us are having, right? It's just like, it's hard to read the news. And then here Jenna Bednar comes in and tells you, what do you mean you're not standing up on behalf of democracy? Like I'm the last thing you want to hear. But so I guess we should move, but I want to answer this question. What I've been saying is pick a corner, right? Pick something that you can focus on. We all have expertise in this room. Maybe it's something that you have expertise in, maybe it's something you have particular interests in, right? Pick that. And just like, because it's a fire hose. It's a fire hose coming at you, and it's also a fire hose of an ask that I have up on this screen, and that's not fair, right? We can't do it all, but you can maybe do something. And for me, a piece of that something is saying to people, look, this president has the right to pursue policies. And we need to bear in mind that probably a solid number of people in this room are in support of the policy agenda. And a majority of Americans are in support of the policy agenda. And that deserves a lot of respect. It's the process. It's about the process for me. And democracy. Okay, so, but this belief that others will back you up is damaged by polarization. Sure. Okay, so, and that's actually where I was about to go. So I had talked before about in the institutional space, what causes it to fail. That's all in this frame of competition. In the norm space, what causes it to fail is when any one of those three conditions aren't met, right? When we don't have common expectations of behavior, when we lack any sense of personal agency or responsibility, or we aren't confident that anybody else is going to be there when we stand up. Yeah.
I'm wondering if your analysis factors, and you made a comment of just recently about human behavior, and really understanding human behavior and biology. And what I'm wondering is, does your analysis take into account that the one way that systems can fail or have tipping points, okay, is when the conditions in the environment essentially invoke a form of PTSD on the population? Okay.
We're
And the
afraid.
reality is that people can't function and operate the same way in these norms if you are actually affecting their ability to feel safe in their environment. I mean, you literally go into different places in your nervous system and your whole behavior. Do you incorporate getting deeper into the biology of humans and understanding the fact that if people don't feel safe, and this is where we can learn a lot about the human nervous system, and this is where you can get actually into Porges.
I love that. No, I
Nervous
haven't
system,
done
stuff like
that.
that. Or we could talk more about that, but that's a whole nother factor here, and that's where tipping points can happen in systems, including like the Civil War that happened in our country, world wars, things like that. Humans don't function the same way in those kind of environments, pandemics, things like that, that is maybe assumed by these other expectations of norms. So I'm just wondering if these are other ways in which complex adaptive systems can go awry,
For sure.
or that can undermine your ability to be robust, resilient, and all that kind of stuff. So I just didn't know if you get into that at all,
I
or.
mean, emotions can, so fear, the fear response we know is a really good way to divide us. Because we get really afraid, and then so we kind of like hunker down and only want to be around those we think we can trust, and we often will tend to trust those who look most like us or share other kind of identity characteristics with us. And so fear is a real good way of dividing us. for this pluralist democracy to thrive, we have to be able to, well, this comes up a little bit later, respect and actually value that pluralism. We have to believe, and that's why diversity, right up front, I said we depend on diversity, but you're right. Fear, emotions, but emotions can also work another way, right? Like love can come in and cause us to do things on behalf of one another or on behalf of our country that a rational calculus doesn't. So we are biological creatures with all kinds of things that cause us to
The
behave.
problem with certain things that go along with PTSD, you don't snap back.
Yeah.
Okay, what the kind of interventions that are needed to bring people or populations back, that's not just a switch that you can turn. And so that's a kind of system failure that I'm just wondering the limits of, that
Sure.
could be an indication of a limit of the ability of even federalism too.
Yeah, to
And
deal
in
with.
fact, one can argue that that's purposely what's being used right now.
Yeah,
By many people is the fear.
That's what's
People not feeling
causing
safe.
the disengagement.
Yes, that's what triggered my thinking of that. And so a lot of the assumptions of how you would hope that a system could be resilient can in fact be disabled.
I think that's just a really remarkable and important point. And then so what we would want to do, what I would love to learn more about is, what do we understand about recovery? And can we take this understanding of psychological recovery and think about it in this constitutional, where the Constitution is both the combination of what's written and what is unwritten space. I think it's really cool. I haven't seen anyone do that, and I think that's really cool. Yes,
Really
please.
quick word, under norm space, within what makes a democratic system fragile, you have the words in green, frame of collaboration. Say some more word, what that's doing there, what it.
Yes, thank you. And so over here, the institutional, this is the Madisonian side, and it's all a frame of competition. We need rivals, rivalry. This collaboration is a shared vision, shared action, right? That's what's going on with norms. Very different from competition. This is us seeing things the same way and working together to get there. It's a really, so I put it in green because I like the color, but also because I wanted to make it clear that these are two really different ways of thinking about how these formal and informal institutions are operating.
I'm sorry for asking a follow-up question, but just using the words, because collaboration is interesting to me for many reasons. The frames of collaboration, is that a risk or a positive in terms of democratic systems being fragile?
Well, it's,
I just want to understand, that's all.
yeah, well, no, it's
Yeah.
none of that. It's just,
Okay.
if we think about a frame of competition, then we want to keep competition alive. We believe competition is important, and there are reasons why competition would fail to protect us. Here, it's a frame of collaboration. That is, we think collaboration is important for promoting democracy, but there are reasons why the collaboration would fail.
Okay, I just understand the use now. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you work on collaboration, I'd love to talk because I'm learning. All right, anyway, to take us back here, the thing I ignored in the middle because it was just awful. Voters see democracy in peril.
It's the apathy. Yeah.
Die, just not a priority.
We're gonna die.
Empathy can be the freeze.
Okay, so these norms, I like to think of them, if the institutions are democracy's skeleton and the people are the muscles that is making it work, norms are the connective tissue. They're socially enforced. And they're also, and this is a complexity word, they're anti-fragile, meaning that if they're not exercised, and I'm looking at all of you who are the same age as me, we get stiff. Right? Our connective tissue gets stiff if we don't keep doing our yoga. So, literally, if the people aren't regularly reminded first that they matter, that we need to be able to count on one another, and that we have the right to have some expectations of our elected officials. If we aren't regularly reminded of that, then we forget. And I think that's kind of what's been happening. All right, super fast, just, this is more speculative, but thinking about federalism by John, see you tomorrow. Federalism and going even more decentralized in a very much a Lynn way, right? The closer we get down to the community, the more we get into pragmatic, solution-focused, party divisions become unimportant. You work on very concrete problems, you agree what the problem is and on what improvement would look like. Right? You can work, it makes it not foolproof, but makes it possible to start to work across difference. It's human scaled. We see one another as humans. I just think that alone is super, super important. We need to be able to see one another as humans across difference. It invites building this sense of agency and belonging. You are in a place where you belong. You matter. You come to value democracy by doing it, by participating in it. And this is another thing that we're doing at Michigan. And I'm sure you're doing it in Indiana too. And and with federalism, because there's so many communities and states, you can witness other things. And this is where we're headed. And I'm gonna take about 10 more minutes. I hope that's okay between you and wine. So you can witness many examples of upholding or not the rule of law, which I think if we were talking about learning is crucial. Okay, so let's move to that process. Yes,
One question from the previous slide,
we'll
having,
go back to it.
since I'm worrying about the local level, but I'm also a lawyer. 35 states dominated by Republicans, ALEC giving them model statutes that preempt local government from adopting ordinances, generally involving social determinants of health. How do we deal locally to build when we bring people together and they're powerless?
Preemption is just a remarkably thorny issue for federalism. I mean, I'm sitting in the city of Ann Arbor where believe it or not, the state legislature told us we can't have a plastic bag ban.
We know what that's like in Bloomington.
Actually, right, I take. On ALEC. ALEC is super smart. Let me just say, kudos Republicans for figuring out that states mattered. Democrats are just starting. Just starting to get it. But so literally Republicans are 20 years ahead of Democrats in recognizing the importance of the states. And this gets back to your comment about Fukuyama. As Congress gets more bound up for various reasons and I'm unable to do anything, increasingly the states are where all the action is, right? And if it's a Republican dominated state, then they get to do all kinds of policy work that their voters supported them to do. But it's just then, of course, with taking it back down to preemption, then you get caught as cities who maybe aren't in step with your legislature and you have plastic bags, even though you didn't want them. All right. So you kind of look like you're poised. You can go back in later. Let's move on. Process. Okay, I had already said I'm here. I've made a lot of jokes about progressive policies and Republican policies, and I'm sorry about that because it isn't. I really want us to be focused on process. And now I'm doing process, although it's going to come back in, but sorry, but process in the sense of policy doesn't just happen. rights recognition definitely doesn't just happen. A sense of our commonly held values or your own personal values. First is not absolutely fixed, but second, we should then ask what causes it to change. So there's lots and lots and lots and lots written on states as policy laboratories. Let's think about them as laboratories for these other kinds of process-oriented phenomena. And I'm going to start literally with process. So for how is it that we, as a democracy, how do we structure ourselves? And in particular with elections. Like this is what a lot of times when we think about democracy, we think about elections. Although I'm really like all about everyday democracy right now, but also about elections. Okay, so first, how do we draw the congressional district boundaries? Varies wildly across the states. That is fascinating. There is so much learning that we can do from this, and so much borrowing ideas from one state to another. So this process of diffusion happens because we look around and we say, wait, we're not totally satisfied with what we have, and another state is trying something different and we can learn. And that's applied not just to, policy about school textbook adoptions, but it's policies about how our relationship to our government happens. And then this one is ranked choice voting. Right, so everybody in gray, at least at the state level, isn't doing it, but Maine and Alaska, early adopters, and some, let's see, this is interesting. Our ranked choice voting this is in blue, used or scheduled to be used in some localities. Well, another fun preemption fact, City of Ann Arbor wants to re-implement ranked choice voting. We used to have it, and then we voted for it again a couple of years ago, but the state said no. I don't know why it's not showing up there, but
Just a quick clarifying question.
Yeah.
So in your map of congressional maps being drawn, so those Republican states and those Democrat states, would those flip if the party control changed from one party to the other?
oh, here,
Yeah.
believe it or not, here we're so used to when we see maps, we think red must mean a red state and blue must be a blue state. Oh, it turns out colors can mean more than that. So blue is where it's a commission of politicians charged with drawing the maps. So that's what we have in Michigan, which is just absolutely wild. Red is a Republican state.
Yeah.
Draws the maps. Okay, that's true. But
blue is the
blue is
Democratic.
not.
No, there's a Democratic state. Look, what color?
Oh, there's blue and then there's blue.
Yeah.
Blue and
Feel blues.
purple.
Yeah.
Purple. There's so many colors.
Honestly, a lot of the states in the South were Democrat states. So if we were like 20 years in the past, 20 years ago, those would probably be majority blue. So is that a fair division, or would it be better to say the party in control draws the maps?
Yeah, no, you're right. I don't.
Not
This
that
is just
this is
now.
not yours. Yeah.
No, this is Brennan Center.
Yeah, that's what you're
No, right, because, okay,
Yeah.
so Michigan, before being this color blue, was red.
Yep.
It's red.
Yeah.
And then the citizens, because we're direct democracy, the citizens said, enough.
Yeah.
We're a 50-50 state. How can it be? For 40 years, it's a Republican legislature. We had bouncing around at the governor. We also had, for that entire period, Democratic senators, right? So it didn't make any sense that it was purely Republican. It should have been purple. So we took it back. Anyway, yeah, I'm sorry. I'll write to the Brennan Center and tell you. None of us like the color choice here. Okay, so this one, I like this comparison because it's options to vote before election day. So one of the many hats that I wear is I run the voting infrastructure on our campus. And one of the things that we had to teach our community about is this year we had 9 days of early voting. And so getting the word out and letting people know, but there's only certain places where you can go. So getting that word out was quite complicated. And anyway, that changed that, in 24 years, the shift in the number of states that allow some form of early voting to make it more possible for you to fit the voting experience into your schedule. And then different rules about primary participation, et cetera. Really the point here is about learning, here is about diversity. This one I love. So at MIT, they have this elections performance lab index, 18 different indicators, lots of different things like, do you have early voting? Have you increased turnout over time? Do you do regular post-election audits, et cetera? Over time, from 2010 to 2022, so in 12 years, every single state improved, except for North Dakota, but it was number one. So I don't know what they did wrong, but yeah, everybody, but they improved by learning from one another, by looking around and learning. Okay, so this policy laboratory where this is on process, but this is still process that we kind of, it feels familiar. Now let's start talking about rights. And this is absolutely insane. I recognize to think about federalism as having anything beneficial for rights. So let's think. Democracy relies on our rights, right? It's about protecting from freedom and rights, to me, same, liberty. Rights recognition is a political and a social process. So we want to say, what role could federalism play in this? So we want to think, can these states be thinking about how complex it is to learn? That you don't just you just wake up one day and decide that certain rights should exist. And we tend, it's a very ordinary human thing to be very conservative. I understand the situation as it is now. And you are suggesting some transformation in my worldview. I don't know how that's going to be. It could be great. It could also not be great. And that uncertainty is scary, right? To get back to our emotions. And so we tend to be risk averse. It's very, very normal. And so we tend to stay put. But some states, this is just states as policy laboratories, but now some states may be ready to make that rights shift. So one of the things, let's see. So I'm going to talk about it in a couple of ways. Acceptance of difference, rights recognition as a mobilizer and as a mirror. Okay. Let me skip this because it's a lot to take in given the time. We can get back to it if you want to talk about it. For recognition and acceptance. So let's just start with letting women vote. Right? Long before the guys decided it was okay at the national level, my son in second grade comes home on Constitution Day, and so they had one of my friends who teaches constitutional law and who had actually argued before the Supreme Court once. Comes just because this is what happened in college friends. Comes and speaks for Constitution Day, and Ori comes home. He's like, "Mama, did you know that there was a time when women weren't allowed to vote?" Like it was inconceivable, as it should be. But it didn't just start in Washington. It actually started out west. And then our lady friends in the East heard about it. And then actually some of back to Michigan, some of our one of our Michigan colleagues has done an awful lot of work about this process of building the coalitions in order to get the support nationally, but started at the states. Anti-miscegenation. before, is it? It's Loving, but who's the? Virginia versus Loving. Long before the Supreme Court said for the nation, we had it in the states. In many states, not all. Same-sex marriage. Long before the Supreme Court said yes for the country, we had it in various ways, various channels, but at the state level. That gives people in other states a chance to think about it. And it turns out if two people of the same sex, as you know, different as that is for my worldview, isn't changing the status of my marriage. Gets you closer to being able to say it's okay. Federalism is a mobilizer. I'm going to scoot through this, but with abortion after Dobbs, everything's headed back down to the states, right? But at a time when support nationally for reproductive rights has gone way up from the 70s, and states are starting to borrow strategies from other states. This is a billboard that I actually sort of love. Literally appeared in Orlando, I think. Turn around, Ron DeSantis is attacking your reproductive rights, head to Michigan for patient doctor medical decisions. So as states are learning from one another and organizing at the state level in states where there is direct democracy, and again, I'm sorry, here we sit in Indiana, but this is, I think, something like 18 cases that where it's appeared on the ballot since 2022. In 16 of the 18 cases, a majority voted for reproductive rights. There's various ways that it's worded, which is why some X's show up, but and then Florida has a 60% threshold. But so states, there's a lot of state learning, and it's a mobilizer by being able to look around. All right, one more point. More there. Federalism is a mirror. And here I'm going straight for it. This. So this is why progressives have for so long said federalism damages democracy. For a really good reason. Good point. And you're able to say, you know, the stuff that my colleague Rob Mickey was documenting that people were experiencing devastatingly. And you say, how could you possibly say that federalism would be good for democracy? As we're thinking of the way you change people's minds, what is federalism doing here? Federalism is not making anybody racist. It's enabling racism, but it's not making anyone racist. And so what I think of it as is holding up a mirror to us. It's exposing the racism. And by racism, I mean not just in all of the red jurisdictions. I mean everywhere. Because
Can you explain what the map means?
sorry, these are the covered jurisdictions for Voting Rights Act that were covered under the Voting Rights Act because of political racism. So these are all the jurisdictions that were found to be
That there was an intervention to stop segregation and voting impact, is that?
yes. So yeah, this is the section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
Order that they came in and began to take action specifically to remove, right?
So in all of these jurisdictions, because they had a history of racism in construction of their electoral laws, so you know, under our Constitution, the states are able to construct electoral laws the way they want, which is why we get all that beautiful diversity. Mm-hmm. But in these jurisdictions, and it's not just states, because it's also some counties, they had a history of racism or it's not just there, but they had a history of racism. So before any, according to the Voting Rights Act, before any changes to electoral laws, it had to be reviewed by the Department of Justice. Sorry.
Like a poll tax is
They
an
got-
example of that. type of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yes. So before any change, it had to go to Washington, get approval, and then it could be implemented. Where everywhere else, they have, they maintain their own authority. But the thing is, why is that? That's because we have this history of racism. But the point is, it took us until the 60s, 1960s, 100 years after the Civil War, where the rest of the country was like, yeah, okay. Federalism was just holding this mirror up to us, to all of us. And it's a good way of us saying, what do we stand for? What are our values? And are we gonna stand for the exhibition, the implementation of that racism? Or will we intervene? So democracy defined by our rights, this political social process, the role that federalism can play in that learning, in that exploration of the rights space, in the same way that it plays a role in the exploration of a, more typical policy space. And then to see this potential of federalism in its relationship to democracy, we want to look both at competitive and the collaborative frames, hoping that I've defined that well enough, and collaborative. And it's has this ability to counter extreme authority, but it also has an ability to build civic mindedness. It's not fail-safe, not at all fail-safe. I'm just talking about possibilities. So implications, federalism, federalism's ability to shape or support democracy has this loyalty and money problem. Please don't forget diversity is a key for democracy. Federalism, by keeping entropy or diversity alive in our system, can boost this robustness. This double security is not a fail-safe, but it does have some disorder, the good kind of disorder. Just think about it. This idea that federalism might be a means for democratic institutional reform and also the rights development. And then also this way that federalism can play this role of mirror and kind of exposing us for where we are now and asking us to say, do we want to stay there?
Jenna, thanks everyone for joining us. Before we all, I just want to really say a quick couple of thanks, especially to Scott, World Executive Director of the workshop, and creating the community that we have here. But also, most importantly, our staff who organized this whole thing. So Karen Mack over here has done so much. Goodman, who was here but is not at the moment. If you're familiar with the workshop, you know her, but she's been instrumental. And then also Kirsten Lozano, who's been sitting at the front desk, welcoming you all. So thank you very much to you all. All right, the Ostrom room has some refreshments and appetizers and things to be able to continue the conversation with Jenna, but one final round of applause.